Hiya and welcome to the second module in this Django course. In this module, we will be creating our first app, wiring up the views and URLs so we've got something to look at in our browser. So without further ado, let's jump straight into it. So by now, you should be familiar with the documentation. You should have access to the repository and already set up our project on our machine. We did this in the last video, module 1. Okay. So you can see here I've got GitHub open again. Now, what we'll do in each module is we will just visit the branch here for the module we're in. So we're in module 2, okay? So click in module 2 and you can open up directly in GitHub at this point, open up steps. I mean, I would advise you to do this. I'm not going to do it this way because I'm teaching and I'm doing it live straight on the screen here. So I'll be opening up the module 2 MD file in my text editor, which is VS Code, but you can do it straight in GitHub and have it in a different screen. Module 2, this is the one, okay? So before I open up VS Code, let's just read a little bit from here and then we'll do a switch and we probably won't come back to GitHub. So, okay, this is module 2. So, okay, these notes follow on from steps module 1. Your current directory will look like this on your machine, and we'll just double check that in a few seconds. If in doubt, you can pull down from the module 2 branch with these codes. And then we've got this, steps and commands. So please CD to your root directory. So if you've gone to bed and woke up the next day and you're having a little look, you might need to turn on your machine and just make sure that you open up your terminal, fire up your virtual environment in your correct directory and you'll be all good to go. Okay, so just always make sure you're in the right directory and you've got your virtual environment ready. So Django makes it easier to build better web apps more quickly and with less code. It's straight from their website. Okay, and you know, when I first started working with Django, I was like, yeah, okay, yeah, well, I've heard that before, but they really do. Okay, you can fire up a Django project and get something in your browser in minutes. It's very quick, very easy, and that's what we'll be doing in this module. So in this module, we will be creating a Django application for our project. A Django application is a Python package that is specifically intended for the use in a Django project. An application may use common Django conventions, such as having modules, tests, URLs, and views, submodules. Okay, so what that means is we bundle up common code and use cases and things like that in a single application. Okay, so we're going to create one called core, which will have all of the logic around our home page. For instance, if we were to have things like a contact us page, things like that, that would be in our core stuff. We'd have another app if we were handling e-commerce. We'd have another app if we were handling, let's say, a blog, something like that. So common code that do sort of common conventions and common classes and functions, you'd stick that in its own little app and you kind of wire it in accordingly. Okay, so that's what we'll be doing in this module. So it says here, applications, open a terminal and use the following command to start a new application. So let me switch to VS Code and open up steps, module 2. And let's open that up in a preview. Close that down. That looks a little bit better. What are we looking at? So our root directory should look like this. So we've got Django course, got media steps, VENV, get ignore, manage.py, readme, and requirements. Okay, so we're good to go. Just double check. Always make sure that you've got the right configuration of stuff in your directory before we crack on. If in doubt, run these codes. Let's get going. Okay, so this is my terminal. You can see I've got VENV. I've got my virtual environment active. If you don't know how to do that, look back in the last module. But you need to fire up your virtual environment before we get going. So Python, manage.py. So manage.py, remember, that's what we're calling here. Okay, so that's the file that we're accessing when we're calling manage.py. Start app is a management command in straight out the box of Django. So that is the command that we're now using, start app, and we're calling it core. Now, if you change core to Bobby, that would name the app Bobby. Okay. Press enter. Happy days. What has that done? It's created this directory here. Open it up. You've got a migrations directory. That will make some sense when we start creating some models. And you've got a couple of done init or constructor files, one in migrations and one in core. Straight out of the box. Don't delete them. You need them. You need those init files. Excuse me. You've got an admin.py file. That's where we register models to the admin page, which we'll look at in another module. We've got an apps.py file. That's got some kind of, it's got a class here that kind of just states what this app is called, and this is when we add this app into this installed apps of the project. This is what it's referencing. Modules, nothing in there. Tests, nothing in there. And views, nothing in there. Okay, so that's what we're looking like. We'll keep them open for now. So the settings.py file is where we save our project settings. We looked at this in the last module, right? So you'll get used to that file. We'll always be coming backwards and forwards to it. Django will only know to include our core app in the project when we register it. Open Django course /settings.py, Django course settings.py, and register the new application in the installed apps. Okay, so replace the current settings with the following snippet. So before we do that, let's look in here. So this is the settings.py file. Quick whistle stop of the settings file. So it's got a little bit of gumph at the top here telling you about the Django settings. It's been generated by Django admin 4.1.1. You have this straight away when we have the settings file. So it imports path and it allows us then to create a base directory. Okay, so this is the base directory of the project. So it's path, resolve, and you've got parent. So that is the root directory of the project. That's what the base directory now becomes, or this variable now becomes in this project. Secret key. Okay, so that can basically be anything but keep it secret. But this is what it defaults to when we start a new project. It'll be different each time. Debug defaults to true. So when it's true, you get to see this fancy debug screen when something goes wrong with your code, which is really helpful when you're debugging. But if you change it to false or Boolean, so 1, 0, so if it's 0, that would be false, you will not get the debug screen. Allowed hosts, that allows us to say the domain of the project or the IP address. That when you go into production, you need to stipulate the IP address in that. Otherwise, you just won't be able to render your project to the to production. I will add localhost in there for development. You've got installed apps, so we'll be adding core in there. Do you know what? Just do it now. You just do it like that. Okay, add a little trailing comma. Not necessary, but I like to add them because if you forget, it all falls down. You've got middleware. That's where you detail all the project middleware. We will be adding some to that soon enough, but you see you've got security middleware, you've got common middleware, CSRF middleware. That's really helpful with forms. So cross-site forgery tokens that get added to forms. We've got the root URL conf, so that tells the project where our root URLs live. You can see it's in Django course.urls, which is this one here. Templates, that's where Django, that setting there, or that variable there, tells Django where to look for templates and context processes and things like that for the project. But we'll come on to that a little bit later in some other modules. Some of the context processes as default are the debug. You've got request, so it gives us access to the user request in the browser. Got WSGI application, don't really need to know about that just yet. We've got database config. So this course, we're not actually looking at the database. We're going to just stay with the DB SQLite 3. Other videos that I've put together will go into detail about how to upgrade to something more sustainable, such as Postgres or another SQL database that is more kind of scalable and kind of production proof. You've then got auth password validators. So this is what we use for the built-in user model in Django. This helps us create passwords and authenticate users. You've got some other variables here. So language code, it defaults to ENUS, time zone, it defaults to UTC. Now you can change these to your right time zone accordingly. We're not going to touch them. Then we've got static URL. Talk about static files and media files in a different module. And then we've got this one here, default auto field. You don't really need to know what it is just yet. But that comes straight out of the box. On everything after, I think it's Django 3.6 or along there. That never used to be in there anyway, but that's relatively new. So this is our settings file, okay? So our instructions are telling us to add a core to our installed apps. There we go. This is our application. Do you know what? Let's follow along. Let's just copy that. I want to add that there. A little asterisk there just tells Python that that is commented out. So cool. I'm going to trailing comma. Happy days, right. Number 2, views. A view function, or a view for short. Sorry, excuse me. Sorry, frog in my throat. I had to clear my throat there. So views. A view function, or a view for short, is a Python function that takes a web request and returns a web response. This response can be HTML contents of a web page, a redirect, a 404 error, XML document, or an image. It could be anything. Okay, so let's create our first view. Open Django course core views and write a view to handle the user request response logic for our index page, our home page. So what all of that means is it takes a request and returns a web response. So in this instance, we want to create a view to create a GET request from a user, me or you, in a browser, and the response is the home page that is rendered in the browser. So it's a HTML response, okay? Or sorry, a web page, right? Okay, so that's what we're looking for, and that's what we're trying to create in this view. Okay, so if you open up, where are we? Core and views.py. It's over here. This is what you get by default, but what we want is this. Okay, so we've got from Django.views import generic. What does that mean? Okay, so I don't want to just glance over this, because when I was first learning Django, I was looking at that going, what the hell's going on? So we've installed Django in module 1. Okay, so we have access to the Django package, third-party package, in our virtual environment. Okay, just think about that for a second. Let's go to VENV, that's our virtual environment. Go into lib, site packages, and open up Django. See that there? So from Django.views, so from Django, views, we want to import generic. So we've imported this directory, okay? So then we're creating a class. So this is just a standard Python class, home view, that's what we're calling it, generic.template view, okay? So where are we? We've got, there we go. So we've got template view, which is, so from Django.view generic base, so here, template view. There we go. So this is what we're importing, okay? So we've imported generic, and we're getting access to this template view. So render a template, pass keyword arguments from the URL conf to the context. So you've got a get method, but it inherits from template response mixin, context mixin, and view, okay? So I don't really say much about this in module 1. I'm assuming you are familiar with Python in this course, okay? So I don't need to go into class inheritance and things like that, or class methods and things like that, okay? So, but I did want to touch on what we're actually importing from Django. That's quite important. So you're not just stabbing in the dark. You've also got, so you could equally use redirect view, okay? So you could use, what else have we got in here? You've got base, template response mixin is what we're inheriting here. You've got detail. So you can have a detail view. We will be using that. So base detail view, single object. Where is it? Detail view. So at some point we use a detail view. That would render an object from a database, the details of that single object onto a page. Okay, and what you do, you then pass in the model and the slug of that model, and hey presto, it all renders it automatically. So Django, by using their generic views, it allows us to access a hell of a lot of tried and tested code within Django with minimal amounts of code. Okay, so let me go back to the views.py. So to do this view, to write this view as a class, as a standard class-based view, or indeed a function-based view, it would take much more code than what you're looking at here. Okay, you would need to write some code about the context. You would need to write some code about where to find a template for this particular view, the HTML template. But as we're using the generic template view, you don't really need any of that. In fact, we probably wouldn't need much of this, because Django knows that it automatically, because of the template variable in the settings, it automatically looks for HTML templates that are located in predefined locations in the project. Okay, so, but we are adding this line of code here, template name equals core index.html, because we're going to specifically tell Django where to look. Okay, gone around the houses there a little bit, but essentially this is now our view. So it takes in a request and it returns a web page. The web page schematic, so the HTML, the hypertext markup language that makes up that web page, will be found in a directory called core, and it'll be called index.html. So that's how it's working. Okay, that's the view, takes in a request, returns a web page in this instance. Okay, and this doc string here, I've added that because that is the this is what we add in Django to classes and models and things like that, because you can use auto docs in admin, and if you write it like this, we won't go into details because it's quite advanced for Django. It just creates some automatic documentation for your views, module and models in admin if you use the right doc string. So that's our view. Let's go back to, where are we? Let's close some of these down. Sorry, sometimes I have too much open and I just don't know what's going on. So let's go back to the preview. So we've added this view. 3, templates. We will need a HTML template to render on our browser. So being a web framework, Django needs a convenient way to generate HTML dynamically. The most common approach relies on templates. A template contains the static parts of a desired HTML output, as well as some special syntax describing how dynamic content will be inserted. Okay, so this isn't a static website that we're building here. This is going to have some dynamic stuff going on. So we're going to be creating lines in a database. Sometimes we're going to be rendering specific details from a database. Okay, so it can't just be static data, it needs to be dynamic data, and we'll be using Django's built-in template tags and filters to do that. Okay, but we'll be doing that later on in the course. So Django is configured to find HTML files in registered apps. However, to help Django, you will need to structure the template directory as follows. So within core, we need a templates directory, a core directory within templates, and then that's where we start adding all of our files. So in this case, we'll have an index.html file in there. So let's go into core, new folder, we'll call this templates. We're in there, new folder, call it core. And for this one, if you remember, we wanted to call it index.html. Okay. Templates, core, and then we add the template in core. Mic's falling. There we go. So back to preview. So create HTML template. We want index.html file within core, templates and core. So we're in core, templates, core, and I've called it index.html. There's nothing in there. But if we add this, so this is just HTML. Okay, so you've got doc type HTML, HTML language equals EN, and you've got a head section, got a body section. Okay, and then we close off HTML with a slash. And we've got H1 tag, welcome to our Django project, Django course. Sorry, we'll save that. That's about as basic as HTML as you can get. So URL, so we've got the views, we've got the template now, so now our view knows what HTML template to render on the browser. We now need to wire up the URL. So when we visit a certain URL, it then calls the view and it renders the template, and the response is a web page. Okay, that's kind of the way information processes through a Django view and URL. So URLs, a clean, elegant URL schema is an important detail in a high-quality web app. Django lets you design URLs however you want, with no framework limitations. To design URLs for an app, you create a Python module and formally call it URL conf. So this is the URL configuration. Remember, that is stated in here, settings. Where is it? Root URL conf. So that is the file we're referring to there, so urls.py. This module is pure Python code, and it is mapping between URL path expressions to Python functions, your views. Go ahead and create a new url.py file in core to handle URLs for the core application. So take this code, create a new file in core called urls.py, and we'll dump it all in there. Yeah, so we're from Django.urls import path. So if you're questioning where that is, so from Django.urls import path, which will be detailed in the init file. So if you really want to look where that is, so path, where are we? So .conf import, yeah, so from conf import path. That's how it works. I don't use too much time wasted on that. It's just whenever we say from Django whatever, just if you want to know where it is and details of that actual directory or that file or that function or class, just dig deep in the Django docs. It's nice and easy. Okay, so from dot, so from the same directory that we're in, so from dot we're in core, import views. So we want to import the views, every view that we have in views. The app name is called core, and then you have a URL patterns list. This is the syntax that we must use. So it's a URL patterns equals, and we have a list. Within that, we've then got this line here. So it's path. So this is the path. So the quotes here with nothing in means this is home. This is our home page. So when we visit localhost 8000, which will be our local server, this is where we will be. This is the URL pattern that will be used to render a web page or a web response. So views.homeview, that's this here. And then you put .asView. Because we're using a class-based view, you need to use the .asView. So if you're using a class-based view, a generic class-based view, you would always need to put .asView. If you're using a function-based view, you will not need to do that, okay? And if you forget either way, so if you had asView on a function-based view or you don't have asView on a class-based view, you will get an error message in your browser. Name this home. Now the reason we name it home is so that we can reference that in Django template tags in HTML, which we'll look into in a few moments' time. Okay, so now go ahead and open Django course urls.py, so this one here, and replace the code with the following snippet. So it has docstring at the very top here. We don't need any of that. It's done that in there. Okay, so this was already here. We were already importing admin, but now we want Django.urls import path and include. Okay, so we can, with path, we can access it here, which is what we just used. And include allows us to include the URL patterns in an application. Okay, so we've got URL patterns again, another list. We have the admin site, which is straight out of the box. We'll look at that in another module, so don't worry what that means. And then underneath that, we have path. Now, if I could put core there, and that would prepend the word core on all URLs within the core app. But we don't want that, not for this course. So we'll have that blank. Then we have include. We've got core URLs, which is our core app, the URLs. Namespace is core. Again, that is used when we're referencing the core URLs in our Django template tags, which we'll be looking at in another module. And it just says there are bespoke apps. Let's save. Go to preview, module 2 again. Now what we want to do, we're good to go, by the way. We've created our views. We've wired up the templates and the URLs in our app and the URL conf. Okay, so that's kind of the process we need to go through. Now we can go ahead and run a local server so that we can actually view our project in a browser. So that's what we'll go ahead and do. So local server. So Django has a built-in development server, which is great, which is a lightweight web server written purely in Python. Now Django's development server allows us to develop things rapidly, you'll see in a second, without having to deal with configuration of a production server using such as Apache, right? So until you're ready for production. So use the following command to start a local development server. Let's go ahead and do that. Python server. So I'll go ahead and do a whole bunch of bits and pieces. In fact, it will say you should see this log. So it's watching for files, yeah. And then at the very bottom, I see when I was creating this course, it was 4.0.6. You can see that its new versions are being released all the time. So it's now 4.1.1. It says quit the server with control break. So this is now telling me that we have a browser, sorry, a local development server running so we can actually visit our site in a browser. So it says, don't worry about the unapplied migrations. You would normally, don't worry about that in this module. We'll work through those in a few seconds. So you should be now up and running. You need to open up an incognito browser. So if you don't know how to do that, let's have a little look. Let's open up Chrome. Now if you press Control-Shift-N, it will open up a browser with incognito. It won't have any cookies. Browsing history will all be, fresh as a daisy. That is incognito. It's a fresh browser. Very useful as a developer to do this. Okay, so now if you visit localhost 8000, you see that? Let me zoom in a little bit. So localhost 8000, click enter. You should see welcome to our Django course. That's what it said, right? Just to show that it actually works. If we were to change what it says in index to v1 and save, you can see that it should pick up the change. There we go, v1. Happy days. Revert that back and save. Good. Okay, so I'm really happy with that. Let me close some of these files. We don't need them. Bang, 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 and close and close. Go back into preview. We probably don't even need the server up and running now. No, we don't. Right, okay. So that's running. You can press Control X or Control X will get you out of it, or Control C. So that will close down the server. If I was to go in there now, it would probably say, can't access it. Yeah, there you go. Can't access it. Oh, it did. Oh, because it's still running. Okay, forget that. That's the end of this module, by the way. Before I close it off, let's just go through some of this. Right? Okay, so now we've added some bits and pieces. If you're not at the same point that I am, if you can't see a web response or a web page in your browser after running the server, you've done something wrong. So just double check that you've got the right things in the right places. So we're looking for a core app. We just create a core app. You can see here we've got the migrations, we've got cache, PY cache. So when you run a server or run migrations and things like that, Python and Django go through a whole sequence of commands and it creates a cache. Okay, so that's why we've got that. Don't worry about it. You can see it's grayed out, so it won't be added into GitHub. You've got migrations with an init file, which we have, and now it's actually got a cache file as well. Templates, core index, happy days. You've got admin apps, models, tests, URLs, and views. Admin apps, models, tests, URL, views. You've got Django course, which is happy days. We've got all that. And then you've got media steps, VE and V. Let me close that down. So you've got Django course, yeah, media steps, VE and V. And then you've got some bits and pieces, including requirements at the bottom here. So if you haven't got that configuration on your machine and it's not working, just go back, double track, retrace your steps. Let me try that again. Retrace your steps in this module and just make sure we're on the same page. Make sure you're doing exactly what I'm doing and then run that server again. You'll be all good to go, okay? So please give me some feedback. I love feedback. Add me a comment, like this video, subscribe to the channel. It's all good. Yeah, you add some comments. It allows me to create these videos or create videos that you want to see, right? So I will end the video there. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next module. Thank you. Bye-bye.